The screen glowed blue in a dark room no one was supposed to care about. 19 cameras. One man watching from 18 miles away, scrolling through feeds the way other men scroll through news looking for nothing, finding nothing night after night. Then he stopped. In the corner of the kitchen, the big empty marble kitchen that hadn't felt like home in 3 years, a small hand moved across a piece of paper. A little girl, 9 years old, dark-skinned and quiet, writing something no one had asked her to write. She didn't know anyone was watching. She didn't need an audience. She never did. Her mother was upstairs cleaning rooms that were already clean. The boy in the wheelchair was somewhere down the hall staring at a wall. And this child, this girl nobody looked at twice, was doing something that would change 3 lives before anyone understood what had happened. She was 9 years old. She came to that house to wait for her mother to finish working. No one thought to look twice at her. That was their first mistake. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. I read every single one. And if you believe the quietest people in any room are sometimes holding up the most subscribed to this channel, don't miss what comes next. Gerald Whitmore's name appeared in Forbes 3 years in a row. Not because he chased it, but because the numbers were too large to ignore. He had built his company from a 2-bedroom apartment in Decatur with a laptop, a folding table, and a theory about how enterprise software was failing mid-sized logistics companies. He was right. He was usually right. That was both his greatest strength and the thing that had quietly hollowed out everything else in his life. By the time Noah was born, Gerald was the kind of man who won. He won contracts, won negotiations, won arguments before the other side realized an argument had started. Claire used to joke that he was the only person she knew who approached bedtime stories like a closing statement. He would laugh when she said it. He laughed more back then. The house in Buckhead had been Claire's idea. Not the size of it that was Gerald, but the location, the old oak trees lining the private drive, the way the light came through the back windows in the late afternoon and turned the kitchen floor gold. She had stood in that kitchen the day they toured the property and said it felt like somewhere a family could breathe. Gerald had written the check the same afternoon. They had 3 good years in that house before the accident. It happened on a Tuesday evening in November on I-2856 6 miles from home. A delivery truck ran a red light at 54 miles per hour. The impact was on the passenger side. Claire died before the ambulance arrived. Noah survived, but the damage to his spinal cord was severe and permanent. He was 9 years old. He would never walk again. Gerald remembered almost nothing about the weeks after the funeral. What he remembered clearly was the hospital room, the machines, Noah's face, when the doctors explained what the injury meant in language, simple enough for a child to absorb. Noah had looked at his father then, not at the doctors at Gerald, and Gerald had looked back and felt something he had never felt in a boardroom or a negotiation or any high-stakes moment in his professional life. He felt completely without a next move. He did what he knew how to do. He built a system. He converted the old game room into a physical therapy space with equipment the hospital recommended and then some. He hired a rotating staff, a primary nurse, a backup nurse, a physical therapist, a driver, a housekeeper, a private tutor. He had each one vetted, each one contracted, each one operating within a clear set of expectations. Structure, he told himself, was a form of love. Predictability was safety. If he could control the environment, he could control the risk. The cameras came after an incident 6 months post-accident when a nurse left Noah unattended in the therapy room for nearly 40 minutes to take a personal call in her car. Noah hadn't been hurt, but the possibility of what could have happened settled into Gerald like a stone. He installed 4 cameras that same week, then 8. By the following spring, there were 19 every common area, every hallway, every room Noah moved through regularly, audio included. The staff were informed cameras existed. They signed updated contracts. Not all of them knew the full count. Gerald watched the feeds from his office downtown, usually late at night, when the building had emptied out. He told himself it was responsible. He told himself any good father would do the same. What he did not tell himself, what he did not examine closely enough to name, was that watching the cameras had become the primary way he parented his son. He could see Noah. He did not have to sit with him. The house was beautiful, and it was empty in the way that large, expensive things can be empty. 12 rooms, high ceilings. Claire's bookshelves still lined the study wall, her books untouched because nobody had been able to decide what to do with them. Noah's wheelchair marks had worn faint tracks into the hardwood along his usual routes from his bedroom to the living room, from the living room to the therapy space, from the therapy space back again. The house was a loop. It was also a kind of silence that had its own specific weight. Noah was 12 now, and he was smart, genuinely, quietly smart, in a way that his tutors noted, and his father had not yet found a way to sit close enough to see. He read. He had always read. But in the past year, the reading had slowed. The book stayed open longer on the same pages. He spent more time near the large windows that overlooked the backyard, watching nothing in particular, in the patient way of someone who has learned that the world mostly happens on the other side of glass. He did not complain. That was the thing that hurt most if Gerald had stayed still long enough to feel it. Noah was 12 years old and he had stopped complaining, stopped asking, stopped pushing back the way children are supposed to. He was polite with the nurses. He was cooperative during therapy. He answered his tutor's questions. He did everything he was supposed to do and wanted almost nothing that he said out loud. Diana Okafor arrived on a Monday morning the previous January, sent by the agency that handled the household staff rotation. She was 42 years old with a calm that read to people who didn't pay attention as unremarkable. She wore soft colors. She moved quietly. She did her job without announcing it. Gerald had approved her hire through a 2-line email, vetted, contracted, scheduled. To Gerald, she was a reliable variable in a system he had built to minimize disruption. He saw her on the camera feeds the way he saw the cleaners and the nurses present functioning accounted for. He did not think about her beyond that. This was not cruelty. It was the particular blindness of a man who had organized his entire life around outcomes and had forgotten somewhere in the architecture of his grief to look at people. Diana had a daughter. Gerald learned this the way he learned most things about his household staff, through paperwork. The agency file listed one dependent, AMARA Okafor, age 9, enrolled at Parkview Elementary. Diana's request, submitted formally through the agency, was straightforward on school holidays and designated off days. When childcare arrangements fell through, she asked permission to bring her daughter to the property. AMARA would remain in the kitchen or the staff room near the back of the house and would not interfere with the household routine. Gerald approved the request through email on a Thursday afternoon between 2 phone calls. He did not remember doing it by Friday. The first morning Diana brought AMARA was a Tuesday in November. Outside, the temperature sat at 38 degrees. A low gray sky pressed down over the oak trees on the private drive. Diana's car, a 2014 Civic with a cracked passenger side mirror, pulled through the gate at 7:28 a.m. AMARA stepped out wearing a deep purple dress, a gray wool sweater 2 sizes too large, and brown boots that had been resoled at least once. She had a backpack on that looked heavier than it should have been for a 9-year-old on a day off from school. She did not look up at the house the way most people did when they first saw it. She looked once, registered it, and looked away. Diana put a hand briefly on her daughter's shoulder as they walked toward the side entrance. AMARA nodded at whatever her mother said without breaking stride. Inside, Diana went to work. AMARA found a chair at the far end of the kitchen counter, out of the way, back to the wall facing the door, and sat down. She unzipped the backpack and took out a book. Nobody noticed her. Nobody looked twice. That was still their first mistake. The book was called Gödel Escher Bach, An Eternal Golden Braid. It was 777 pages long. The spine had been cracked and retaped with clear packing tape that had since yellowed at the edges. Several pages had their corners folded. Inside the front cover, in handwriting that was not AMARA's, someone had written, "For the ones who think sideways." AMARA had her legs crossed on the kitchen chair, the book open and flat across her knees, reading, with the focused stillness of someone who had learned early that concentration was a resource you protected. She did not look up when the nurse passed through. She did not look up when Diana moved to the living room with the vacuum. She did not look up when the side door opened and let in a brief rush of cold air from outside, where the temperature had not risen past 38 degrees all morning. She was to all appearances simply not there. Noah had not planned to go to the kitchen. He had planned to go back to his room after his session with Mr. Harlan ended, But Harland had set a comprehension exercise and then spent 12 minutes on a phone call in the hallway with the door almost but not fully closed. Noah had waited. Then he told the nurse who appeared in the doorway that he needed water. He did not need water. He needed to be somewhere that was not a room with Harland in it. He came around the east hallway corner and stopped. There was a child at the kitchen counter he had never seen before. A girl in a purple dress and an oversized gray sweater, reading a book the size of a small brick. She had not heard him. The rubber wheels of his chair made almost no sound on the hardwood. Noah looked at the cover. He angled his chair slightly to read the full title. He knew that book. He had seen it on his mother's shelf in the study, wedged between a biography of Ada Lovelace and a worn collection of Feynman lectures. He had tried to read it once 2 years ago. He had made it 30 pages before deciding it was not a book for him yet. He was not sure it was a book for a 9-year-old either. "That book is for adults," he said. The girl didn't look up. "So is sitting in a house with 19 cameras and not talking to anyone." Noah blinked. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't expected her to know about the cameras, and he hadn't expected that sentence to land the way it did, quietly without malice, like an observation rather than an accusation. "How do you know how many cameras there are?" he asked. "I counted." She turned a page. "Took about 4 minutes." "Why?" She looked up. Her eyes were dark and steady. She did not look at him the way most people had looked at him since the accident, not the practiced, neutral expression adults used when they were trying not to show anything, and not the open discomfort of children who hadn't yet learned to hide their staring. She just looked at him the way you look at someone you're deciding whether to talk to. "Because when you can't control a space," she said, "you should at least understand it." Noah stayed in the doorway. He told himself he was going to get his water and leave. He didn't move. "My name is Noah." "AMARA." She looked back at her book. He rolled farther into the kitchen. He stopped a few feet from the counter, close enough to see the page she was on. It was dense with text and a diagram involving recursion loops inside loops, arrows doubling back on themselves. "What part are you on?" he asked. "The part where he explains that a system can contain true things it can never prove about itself." She didn't look up. "It's about math, but it's also about everything else." Noah thought about that for a moment. "Does it make sense to you?" "Some of it." She turned the page. "The parts that don't make sense yet are the most interesting parts." He had never heard anyone say that before. Every tutor he'd had, Harland included, treated the unclear parts as problems to resolve and move past as quickly as possible, gaps to be filled, evidence of a lesson not yet completed. The idea that the confusing parts might be worth staying with, worth sitting inside for a while, had not been offered to him as an option. "Can I?" He stopped. He wasn't sure what he was asking. AMARA seemed to understand the incomplete question better than he did. "Sit there?" she said, nodding at the space beside the counter where his chair would fit easily. "I'll tell you what the chapter's about. Then you can tell me if it makes sense." He moved to the spot. She explained it the way no teacher had ever explained anything to him, not by shrinking it down to a version that lost its original shape, but by finding the angle from which the real thing was visible. She used the kitchen around them. She used the cameras on the wall. She used the loop of his daily routine, same hallways, same rooms, same schedule, to illustrate what Hofstadter meant by a strange loop, a system that referred back to itself, that contained itself, that could think about its own thinking. Noah found himself leaning forward slightly, elbows on his knees, in the posture he used when something was actually holding his attention, and he had forgotten to manage how he looked while paying it. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet for a moment. "That's the first time anything from that shelf has made sense to me," he said. "Your mom's shelf?" He looked at her. "How did you know it was hers? The handwriting in the front. It doesn't look like it belongs to someone who runs companies." A short pause. "It looks like it belongs to someone who loved the book." Nobody had mentioned his mother in this house in a long time, not casually, not the way AMARA just had, like it was a plain and ordinary thing to acknowledge. He sat with it for a moment, the way she had suggested, sitting with the parts that did not yet make sense. After a while, he said something he hadn't quite meant to say out loud. "People look at me different now, like they're already waiting for me to need something." AMARA didn't answer right away. She closed the book, keeping her thumb on the page. She looked at him with the same steady expression she'd had from the start, not searching, not careful, just present. "Still water runs deep, Noah," she said. "Don't let anyone tell you different." He looked at her. She opened her book and went back to reading. He stayed in the kitchen for another 40 minutes. He did not go back to Harlan's session. He sat in the corner of his mother's kitchen, and for the first time in longer than he could clearly measure, he was somewhere he did not want to leave. 18 miles away in a downtown office with 19 feeds open across 2 monitors, Gerald Whitmore scrolled to the kitchen camera. He watched for a long moment. Then he stopped scrolling. He opened a new note on his desktop and typed 4 words. "Who is this child?" He left the note open for the rest of the day. The second time AMARA came to the house, Noah was already in the kitchen when Diana arrived. He had not planned it that way. He told himself he had simply woken up early and wanted coffee, which was partly true. The fuller truth was that he had spent part of the previous evening thinking about strange loops and wondering whether the girl in the purple dress would come back. He had not mentioned this to anyone because there was no one in the house he particularly wanted to mention it to. Diana noticed him and said good morning in the careful, respectful way all the staff spoke to him, the way that always carried just beneath it a slight recalibration of normal. AMARA came in behind her mother, set her backpack on the same chair at the far end of the counter, and took out the same book without looking at Noah or waiting to be acknowledged. "You're still in the same chapter," Noah said. "I went back to the beginning of it. I wanted to make sure I understood it before I moved on." He thought about that. Harlan's methodology was the opposite, always forward, always the next section, always the benchmark date approaching like a wall. "Does going back actually work?" he asked. "Depends on whether you care more about finishing or understanding." She looked up briefly. "Those are different goals." Over the following 3 weeks, a pattern established itself. AMARA came on school holidays, on teacher in-service days, and once on a Friday afternoon when her school released early. Each time she found the same chair, opened the same backpack, and settled in without ceremony. Noah began arriving in the kitchen earlier. He stopped cutting his Harlan sessions short and started ending them on time because he now had somewhere he wanted to be afterward. Nobody in the house commented on this directly. Diana observed it with the quiet attention of a woman who noticed things and kept her observations to herself. The nurses noted that Noah's afternoon mood had improved without being able to point to a specific cause. Harlan attributed the change to his own instruction and submitted his next weekly report with a section on Noah's increased engagement with structured academic programming. It was during the 3rd week that the paper appeared on the kitchen counter. Gerald had been home briefly the evening before a rare occurrence for a call he preferred to take from his home office. He had printed several pages from the briefing materials and left them on the kitchen counter before heading upstairs. By morning, he was already back downtown. The pages stayed where he had left them. They contained a constraint optimization problem his engineering team had been working on for nearly 3 weeks, routing logic for a new distribution platform, specifically how to minimize latency across a variable network while keeping computational load within acceptable bounds. 3 senior engineers had taken runs at it. All 3 had hit the same wall in slightly different places. AMARA arrived that morning, read for 40 minutes, then stood to get water from the sink. She passed the counter. She stopped. She stood in front of the pages for a moment. Then she went back to her chair, took out her pencil, returned to the counter, and wrote in the white margin at the bottom of the 3rd page. Her handwriting was small and unhurried. She worked for just under 10 minutes. When she finished, she looked at what she had written, then set the pencil down, picked up her glass of water, and returned to her chair. She did not mention it to anyone. She went back to her book. Gerald found the pages the following morning. He photographed the margin and sent it to his lead engineer with one line. "Can you look at this and tell me what you think?" The engineer called back in 40 minutes. "Where did this come from?" he asked. "I'm still working that out," Gerald said. "Is it correct?" A brief pause. "It's more than correct, sir. Whoever did this found a path none of us had considered. This saves us 2 weeks of iteration, maybe more." Gerald ended the call. He sat at his desk. Then he pulled up the kitchen camera footage from the previous morning and scrolled to the right timestamp. He watched the full sequence, 9 minutes and 40 seconds, of a 9-year-old girl standing at a counter with a pencil, then walking away without a word to anyone. He watched it twice, then a third time. He was still sitting with the footage open when the email from Harlan arrived. It was professionally worded, the kind of email written by someone who understood that written records matter. Mr. Whitmore, I want to flag a concern. The housekeeper's daughter has been spending time in proximity to Noah's spaces over the past several weeks. I've noticed it affecting the structure of our work together. Noah is a focused student when the environment supports focus. I raise this only in his interest. Gerald read it. He looked at the camera feed still open on his other monitor. Then he opened his email and composed a message to the agency coordinator. AMARA's access to the main household areas should be limited going forward. The kitchen and study hallway were active work zones. She was welcome to use the staff room at the rear of the property. He sent it. He closed his laptop. Then he requested the full background check on Diana Okafor. It came back the following morning. Clean record. Modest apartment in Clarkston. One dependent. 11 years of reliable household employment. No flags of any kind. Attached at the bottom was a scanned document the investigator had flagged as potentially relevant. A letter from the Georgia Institute of Technology's Office of Gifted and Talented Programs, dated 14 months prior. Addressed to a student, AMARA Ose Okafor, age 8. The letter offered full academic sponsorship through their Accelerated STEM Pathway program, $38,000 per year renewable annually through high school graduation. Beneath it was a second document, a handwritten letter of decline signed Diana Okafor. The reason given was brief family circumstances do not permit participation at this time. Gerald read both letters. He read them again. He turned the report face down on his desk. Outside his office window, Atlanta continued its Tuesday morning. 18 miles north, in a house with 19 cameras and one girl nobody had looked at twice, the kitchen chair at the far end of the counter sat empty and waiting. He did not sleep well that night. He kept coming back to one detail that did not fit the shape of anything else he knew. The letter of decline had been written by Diana, but the handwriting on the optimization problem, neat, precise, smaller than most adults managed, belonged to AMARA. An 8-year-old girl had been offered $38,000 a year to study at Georgia Tech, and someone in that family had turned it down quietly without complaint, without asking for anything from anyone. He thought about the word quietly for a long time. In his world, people who had something worth having made sure you knew about it. They positioned it, leveraged it, used it. Silence around something valuable was not a characteristic of his world. It was not something he fully understood. He pulled the camera feed up again from his phone, lying in the dark of his home office close to midnight. The kitchen, the counter. 9 minutes and 40 seconds. The girl who solved the problem and then walked back to her chair and read her book. He set the phone face down. He stared at the ceiling. He had sent the email to the agency. The restriction was already in place. He had not yet decided how he felt about that. Diana read the email from the agency on a Wednesday morning, standing in the laundry room off the east hallway, while AMARA was still in the car finishing the last pages of a chapter she had started the night before. Diana read it once, then again, then set her phone in her apron pocket and stood for a moment, looking at the washing machine that was not yet running. She was not surprised. She had worked in enough households to know that the space between employed and expendable was never as wide as it appeared. She had not expected it to happen this way, through an agency memo rather than a conversation, but she had not been entirely unprepared. The girl was 9 years old, and she asked questions, and she took up space in the way that very bright children do, the kind of space that has nothing to do with volume and everything to do with the quality of attention they pull from a room. She went out to the car and told AMARA to bring her backpack and stay near the back of the house today. AMARA looked at her mother. "The staff room." "For now," Diana said. "Come on." AMARA did not ask why. She picked up her backpack and followed her mother inside. She found a chair in the staff room, a smaller space at the rear of the property, with one window looking onto the service driveway, and sat down. She opened her book. Diana, folding towels in the adjacent room, with the door open between them, could hear that the pages were turning more slowly than usual. Noah noticed the change before anyone told him. He arrived in the kitchen at his usual time, and the chair at the far end of the counter was empty. He waited. He went to the window and came back. He asked the nurse if she had seen the housekeeper's daughter. The nurse said the child was in the back of the house today and returned to her notes. Noah sat for a few minutes. Then he went to find Harlan and said he needed an hour before their session. Harlan began to respond. Noah had already turned his chair around. He found his father's contact and called. He had the number. He rarely used it because Gerald was most reachable by text and most present through a camera feed. Noah had learned in the quiet way children learn the emotional architecture of their homes that calling directly was reserved for emergencies. Gerald answered on the second ring. Noah, is everything? Don't do this, Noah said. A silence opened between them. She's the only person in this house, Noah said, who talks to me like I'm still going somewhere. Gerald did not answer immediately. In his office downtown, he was sitting very still, looking at the camera feed he had not closed since the night before. I'm looking at the footage, Noah. Then you already know, Noah said quietly. So why are you listening to Harlan? The call lasted 4 minutes in total. Most of it was silence, the silence of Gerald, thinking the silence of Noah, waiting the particular silence that exists between a father and a son who have not spoken this directly in a long time and are both aware of it. When it ended, Gerald opened his email, found the message he had sent to the agency coordinator, and composed a follow-up. The previous instruction was rescinded. No access restrictions were to be implemented. He sent it. He sat back. It was a small action that took less than 3 minutes. But it was the first time in 3 years that Gerald Whitmore had looked at a decision he had already made and chosen differently, not because someone above him had overruled it, not because the data had changed, but because his son had called and told him something true, and Gerald had been still enough to hear it. He pulled up the camera feed and scrolled back through weeks of footage, not to monitor, but to understand. He saw things he had looked at before without registering. He saw AMARA ask Noah what he thought a question was actually asking, then watch him work toward his own answer without rushing him. He saw Noah get something wrong and try again without being told of something Gerald had almost never seen during a Harlan session. He saw the afternoon when Noah had laughed suddenly and genuinely caught off guard by something AMARA said. Gerald rewound that clip twice. He could not fix a date to the last time he had seen his son laugh like that, which meant it had been long enough ago that the memory had stopped being specific. He watched AMARA sit on the kitchen floor beside Noah's wheelchair, back against the cabinet when Noah was frustrated with a problem and needed someone at eye level rather than above him. He watched her hand Noah a glass of water during a long session without interrupting because she had noticed his voice getting dry. He watched a girl who had been told in every structural way a household could communicate it that she was a background figure behave as though the person in front of her was the only one in the room worth her full attention. He closed the laptop. He thought about Harlan's email, the careful professional language, the phrase in Noah's interest. He thought about the engineers who had spent 3 weeks on a problem a 9-year-old had resolved in under 10 minutes and then walked away from in silence. He thought about the letter from Georgia Tech and the handwritten reply beneath it. Family circumstances do not permit participation at this time. He thought about what it cost to write those words, to mean them, and then to walk into someone else's house the next morning and fold their towels and ask for nothing. The following morning, AMARA arrived with Diana at 7:28 a.m. She came through the side entrance and turned toward the staff room out of habit because that was where she had been told to go, and nobody had told her anything had changed. Diana touched her shoulder gently. You can go to the kitchen. AMARA looked at her mother. Then she turned and walked down the east hallway to the kitchen, where Noah was already at the counter with 2 cups of coffee, one of which was more milk than coffee, because that was how AMARA drank it. Something he had noticed weeks ago and not mentioned until now. She sat down. She looked at the cup. She looked at him. She reached into her backpack and took out a small piece of paper, folded in thirds. She set it on the counter beside the cup without explanation. What's this? He asked. Something I wrote, she said. You don't have to read it now. He read it then. It was a short poem, 12 lines, no title. It was about a bird that had learned to navigate by landmarks on the ground rather than the open sky because the sky had, for a time, been unavailable to it. The bird did not consider itself diminished. It had simply learned a different kind of orientation. At the bottom, in handwriting slightly smaller than the poem itself, were 5 words. Still water runs deep. A Noah folded the paper carefully and slid it between the front cover and the first page of Gödel Escher Bach, the book he had borrowed from his mother's shelf and had been rereading from the beginning. "Thank you," he said. Amara nodded. She opened her own book to the chapter she was on. They sat together in the kitchen while the morning came fully through the windows and turned the floor, the color of old gold, the way Claire Whitmore had said it would, the first day she ever stood in that room, and said it felt like somewhere a family could breathe. Gerald left the office at 3:45 on a Thursday afternoon. His assistant, who had worked for him 6 years and had never seen him leave before, Seven, looked up as he came through the glass door with his coat already on. He told her he was going home. She did not ask why. He drove himself. He sat in traffic on Peachtree Road and did not check his phone. He watched the city through the windshield Atlanta in the late afternoon, the light going amber across the buildings, people moving with the purposeful hurry of people already thinking about wherever they were going next. He had driven this route hundreds of times and could not have said under honest questioning how much of it he had actually seen. He pulled through the gate at 4:22. Diana's 2014 Civic was still in the parking area near the side entrance. He sat in his own car for a moment after the engine stopped. Inside, Diana was in the kitchen. She heard the door and turned, and the expression that crossed her face in the half-second before she composed it was not guilt and not fear, but the specific wariness of someone who has learned to read the arrival of power as something requiring preparation. Gerald recognized it. He had caused it in enough people to know its shape. "I'm sorry to come without notice," he said. Diana set down the dish she was holding. "It's your house, Mr. Whitmore." "I know." He hung his coat on the hook by the door and came into the kitchen. "Do you have a few minutes?" She looked at him carefully. Then she sat down across the counter from him, leaving the width of marble between them. The afternoon light was doing what it did at this hour, coming through the back windows at an angle that turned the floor gold. "I want to ask you about AMARA," he said. "Not the file. Tell me who she is." Diana was quiet for a moment. Then she began. "She taught herself to read before she turned 3. I came home one afternoon and she was on the floor with a library book, reading it aloud to herself. Not sounding out words, reading." A pause. "She reads everything: cereal boxes, instruction manuals, legal notices in the newspaper. She is not showing off when she does it. She is just hungry for it in a way I have never seen in another child." Gerald listened without interrupting. "She started coming to the library with me when she was 4. She would choose books I couldn't explain, books on physics, mathematics systems. The librarians knew her by name. One of them set books aside for her the way you set things aside for a good customer." Diana's hands were still on the counter. "She has never once asked me to buy her something she saw in a store. Over 9 years, she has asked me maybe 40 times if we could go to the library." "The letter," Gerald said, "from Georgia Tech." Diana's expression did not change, but something in it settled. "She wrote the refusal herself," Diana said. "I didn't know until after I'd signed it. She drafted the whole thing and brought it to me after dinner, already folded the envelope, already addressed. She said she had looked up the proper format online." A pause. "I asked her why she had done it. She said she didn't want me to have to find the words." Gerald was very still. "She was 8 years old," Diana said. "She told me Mama Smart doesn't expire, like she was the one doing the comforting." She looked at him directly. "I called the program coordinator afterward. I asked about supplemental funds, housing assistance, anything. The scholarship covered tuition and materials. The rest, the commute, the gap in my income, had no solution I could make work." A short pause. "I am not telling you this for sympathy. You asked." "I know," Gerald said. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Outside, the afternoon had gone quieter, the particular stillness of a house between the end of one thing and the start of the next. The kitchen held the silence, the way good rooms hold it, not emptily, but with weight. The kitchen was quiet. The light through the windows shifted slightly as a cloud moved. The floor went from gold to a quieter version of itself. Gerald sat with it, a child who had been offered $38,000 a year and had protected her mother from the grief of declining it, who had solved an engineering problem in the margin of a printout and walked away without a word, who had written a poem about navigating by landmarks when the sky is unavailable, and left it folded beside a cup of coffee, made the right way for a boy she had known 6 weeks. He thought about what it meant to move through the world carrying that much and asking for nothing not once. That evening after Diana and AMARA had gone, Gerald opened the camera feed for the last time. He scrolled through the afternoon footage without knowing exactly what he was looking for. He stopped on a clip from the previous week. Noah in the kitchen with a handwritten draft in front of him, a short presentation for his online school session. He had chosen resilience as his topic. He had been working on it for 4 days. In the clip, he read it aloud. His voice was unsteady in the way voices are when the words are close to something true. AMARA sat across from him and listened all the way through without moving. When Noah finished, she didn't speak immediately. "What if I mess up?" Noah said. "Then they'll see you try," AMARA said. "And that matters more than you think." "What if it's not enough?" She held his gaze. "Still water runs deep, Noah. Say it again, like you mean it, because you do." He read it again. His voice did not shake the second time. Gerald watched the clip to its end. Then he sat in the dark of his office, without moving, without checking anything for a long time. He thought about the 19 cameras and what they had given him and what they had not. He had watched his son through a screen for 3 years and called it protection. He had built a perimeter around a child who needed a presence. He got up. He walked down the hallway and pushed open the door to Noah's room. Noah was awake, reading lamp-on book open across his lap. He looked up when the door opened, and for just a moment before he had time to arrange his expression, Gerald saw something, not surprise exactly, but the look of someone who had been hoping for something and had almost stopped expecting it would arrive. Gerald pulled the chair from the corner. He sat down beside his son. He did not explain. He did not apologize yet. He just sat there. "What are you reading?" he asked. Noah told him. And then for the first time in 3 years, they talked not through a screen, not through a text message, not across 18 miles of city, in the same room in the same light, with nothing between them at all. The changes Gerald made were not announced. They did not come with an explanation or an apology or a family meeting. They came the way real changes come quietly, one decision at a time, each one small enough to seem ordinary until you look back and saw the distance covered. He began coming home before 6. Not every day at first, then most days, then with the consistency of someone who had rearranged his priorities in a way that had become load-bearing. He told his assistant to move his late calls to the morning. He told his board he would be dialing in remotely on Thursday afternoons. Nobody pushed back. He had not expected them to, but he had also, he realized, never tested it before. He removed cameras. The first ones to go were in Noah's room in the therapy space. Then the kitchen, then the study hallway. He kept the exterior cameras on the gate, in the perimeter the ones that served their original purpose, without standing in for something else. The monitors in his office downtown went dark, 1 feet at a time, over the course of 3 weeks. His assistant noticed and said nothing. She had worked for him long enough to understand that the silences he kept were usually the most important ones. He told Harlan professionally and without elaboration that his services were no longer needed. He paid out the remainder of the contract. He wrote the termination letter himself rather than having legal do it, because it seemed like the kind of thing a person should do themselves. He began sitting with Noah during the physical therapy sessions, not managing them, not reviewing them, sitting beside his son while they happen the way you sit beside someone you care about when something is hard. The therapist, a woman named Donna, who had been doing this work for 20 years and had seen every variety of parent notice the change without commenting on it. She had learned that commentary was rarely what the moment needed. Noah noticed everything. He did not say much about it directly because he was 12 years old and had learned in the way his father had also once learned that the things you most want to say are often the ones that need the most time before they have the right shape. But his posture shifted. He asked his father questions, small ones at first about the company, about decisions Gerald was making, and then larger ones about the accident, about his mother, about the things that had been sitting in the house untouched for 3 years. Gerald answered them, not perfectly, not all at once, but he answered them, which was the part that mattered. It was in those conversations that Gerald first told his son he had an idea. He wanted to create a foundation. He wanted to name it after Claire, because Claire was the person who had always seen people clearly, who had stood in a kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon, and known immediately that it was somewhere a family could breathe. He wanted the foundation to do what the Georgia Tech letter had not done, to go the full distance to cover not just tuition, but the actual cost of showing up. Noah listened. Then he said, "What's it going to be called, Dury?" "The Claire Whitmore Foundation," Gerald said. Noah thought about it. "She would have liked that it started because of AMARA." Gerald looked at his son. "Yeah," he said, "she would have." The foundation took 4 months to establish the legal structure, the funding mechanism, the selection criteria, the partnership with 3 Atlanta area school districts. Gerald worked on it the way he worked on everything that mattered, completely without delegating the parts that required judgment. He set the terms of the scholarship himself: full tuition, housing allowance, transportation stipend, equipment, the actual cost of showing up for as many years as it took. The inaugural cohort was 12 students. AMARA Ose Okafor was among them. The letter that arrived at Diana's apartment on a Thursday morning was formal and precise. The scholarship value was $42,000 per year, renewable through high school graduation. All costs included. Diana called Gerald that afternoon. He answered on the first ring. "Mr. Whitmore," she began. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I just wanted to make sure it arrived." A silence on the line, the kind that is not empty. "It arrived," Diana said. The ceremony was held on a Saturday morning in late March at the Whitmore Group's conference center in Midtown, a large, light-filled room Gerald had always used for board presentations and had never before used for anything that felt like this. The 12 inaugural scholars and their families came. Members of the Atlanta education community came. A few journalists came, though Gerald had asked that coverage remain focused on the students. Noah spoke. He had written the remarks himself over 2 weeks in the kitchen, often, with AMARA across the counter from him, both of them working. She had not written a word of it. She had asked questions when he got stuck the way she always did, not pointing toward the answer, but clearing the path to it. He spoke about resilience. He spoke about the people who see potential before it has anything to prove. He spoke about his mother briefly in a way that was true without being performed. His voice was steady throughout, the steadiness of someone who has practiced not the words but the willingness to mean them. At the end, he looked out at the room. He found AMARA in the front row. She was wearing the deep purple dress, the same one she had been wearing the first morning she walked into that kitchen, the same color that had caught his eye before he knew her name. She was sitting very straight and looking at him with the same level, unguarded attention she brought to everything worth paying attention to. He held her gaze. "Someone told me something once," he said, "in a kitchen on a cold morning when I was not sure I was going to be okay." He paused. "She told me that still water runs deep, that I shouldn't let anyone tell me different." The room was very quiet. "I want every person in this room to hear that today. Whatever you're carrying, whatever they've told you about what you can or can't do, still water runs deep. Don't let anyone tell you different." In the front row, AMARA did not clap immediately. She looked at him for a moment, the way she had looked at him the first day, deciding whether to talk to him. Then she nodded once, the small, certain nod of someone confirming that something has been completed correctly. Diana, seated beside her daughter, pressed one hand over her mouth. Her other hand found AMARA's and held it. Gerald stood at the side of the room and watched his son at the podium. He thought about the 19 cameras. He thought about the feeds he had watched for 3 years from an office 18 miles away, telling himself he was protecting something. He thought about what he had actually been doing and what it had cost and what it had taken a 9-year-old girl in a purple dress with a backpack full of books to show him the difference. After the ceremony, Noah and AMARA sat together at a table near the window, while the adults talked around them. AMARA had her notebook open. Noah had a pen. Between them on the table, the pages held 2 kinds of handwriting, the careful equations she was explaining, and the larger, less precise lines of his notes. Nobody was photographing them. Nobody was watching a feed. There was no screen between them and the world. There was just the table and the window and the light and 2 children working. There is a particular kind of child that the world is not built to notice. Not the loudest child, not the most insistent, not the one who pushes to the front of the room and makes sure everyone sees what they can do. The quiet one, the one who sits in a corner with a book that is too old for them, who solves problems in the margins of other people's papers, and walks away, who writes the difficult letter so that the person they love doesn't have to, who says smart doesn't expire at 8 years old because they need it to be true, and they understand already that some truths only stay alive if someone keeps saying them. AMARA never asked for anything. That is the part of this story I want you to sit with longest. Not the foundation, not the scholarship, not the recognition, those things matter, but they came last. What came first was a child who simply kept showing up, kept being exactly who she was, in a house where nobody thought to look twice at her, and changed everything anyway. We talk a lot about potential. We use it as a noun, something a person has, something that can be identified and invested in. But potential is not passive. It moves through rooms. It sits in kitchen chairs with heavy backpacks. It does not wait to be discovered. The question this story asks, the one I want to leave with you today, is not about Gerald or Noah or even AMARA. It is about the chair at the end of the counter. Who is sitting in it in your life right now that you have not yet looked at directly? Whose backpack have you glanced at without asking what's inside? Whose quiet have you mistaken for absence? Whose still water have you walked past without stopping to wonder how deep it runs? Because here is what Gerald learned eventually through 19 cameras and one phone call from his son and one afternoon in a kitchen with the light going gold. Protection without presence is just distance with a better name. And distance, however well-intentioned, is not the same thing as love. If this story stayed with you, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, who was the person in your life who saw what you were carrying before you had the words to explain it? Or tell me about the AMARA in your world, the quiet one, doing the work without the recognition, the one whose water runs deepest. And if you believe that the next voice that changes everything might already be in the room, that genius does not announce itself, that still water runs deep, hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe. These are the stories that need to keep breathing. I'll see you in the next one.
And that's where the story ends, but karma never sleep. If that story hit the different, smash the like button and subscribe to the Black Karma story. We drop new story every week about justice, betrayal, and karma hitting by heart. And don't forget, ring the notification bell so you always first in line. Now, tell me in the comment, what would you have done in their shoe? I read every single reply. And now, see you in the next one. On Black Karma Stories, karma always wins.